Hi, I'm Joel Murphy, and I've been working with and making open source hardware for over 20 years. I've been a supporter of OSHWA since its foundational meetings in 2010. I was a board member for the organization in the teens, and I'm honored to have been industry mentor for their NSF I-Core training in the fall of 2024. I'm sad to miss you all in person, but I'm super happy to share this story with you. My background is in visual art, and I made kinetic sculpture for years through the 90s and aughts, but that never made me any money. In 2006, I got lucky and had an opportunity to apply for and got a job teaching physical computing to Parsons Design and Technology grad students in New York City. I was an adjunct professor there until 2014 when I burnt out. During that time, I started up my consulting company called Flywheel Lab, where I make other people's cool projects. When I started teaching, it was a couple of years before Arduino had a stable hardware platform, so in order to give my students the most comprehensive education, I went low level with microchip PIC chips, which kind of pissed off my students. But by 2011, Arduino was firmly in place as the go-to platform for learning and building projects with electronics of the size and scope that my students worked in. That spring 2011 semester, a number of students wanted to incorporate biosensing in their projects. As far as biosensing goes, there's some low-hanging fruit, like galvanic skin response, now known as electrodermal activity, but a few intrepid students wanted to get heart rate data to play with. So I dug around and found a fairly simple circuit using an LED and an op-amp, components that had already been a part of their earlier lessons. The circuit is called a transimpedance amplifier, or TIA, and it is the core of a photoplasmograph, or PPG heart rate sensor. I gave my students the schematics and guidance, but still, the breadboarded projects barely worked if you held your tongue at the right angle. After the semester, I met up with my friend and colleague Yuri Gitman, who was also teaching physical computing, and we figured if we could make a functional PPG sensor, we would have more cool projects and less sad students. Our classes were always hungry for new sensors that were easy to use and gave a simple, direct signal. We had seen the burst of startups rise up around us over the previous couple of years, and we're trying to figure out a way to break into the open source hardware scene with a viable product. So we put this idea on the top of the list. That summer, we spent 2 months and about $250 prototyping what we called PulseSensor. Those were the heady days of crowdfunding, and at the end of the summer, we launched a Kickstarter campaign to raise funds to make and sell PulseSensor to folks who wanted it. Having working prototypes and contact with a known manufacturing partner in Shenzhen lined up, we lowballed our funding goal, setting it at $5,000 to cover a 500-unit run and pay ourselves a little bit of scratch, because we wanted to succeed, but more because we wanted anyone who wanted a pulse sensor to get one. We had tapped all our networks to get eyeballs on our Kickstarter, and new folks wanted it. We wound up getting $18,418 from 491 backers. Do the math. Since then, people keep buying pulse sensor, and so we keep making them. Our company, called World Famous Electronics, is small but sustainable and has run a profit for the past 14 years. The title of this talk is Designing Sideways, and that's what I did when I was working out the hardware prototype for PulseSensor. I looked at the TIA circuit and the issues involved in designing it with frequency-matched components and tuning it with just the right passives, and thought, there's got to be a better way. I'm a sculptor, so I'm lazy, and I always try to either cut or look around corners. I searched around for what kind of component solutions were available and discovered that Avago made a small integrated light sensor chip that goes inside every mobile phone to measure the ambient light so the MCU can adjust the LCD brightness. It has a tuned photodiode TIA circuit in it that has a peak sensitivity to green light, 515 nanometers specifically. With that sensor on the bench, I just had to find the right green LED, and turns out King Bright happened to make a reverse mount super bright green LED. The two parts are frequency matched almost perfectly, and I don't have to tune or tweak anything. The reverse mount LED is especially applicable because that means the only thing on the front or skin contact side of PulseSensor is the tiny Avogo chip, making it easy to cover with a small, round, clear vinyl sticker to protect it from skin oils and sweat. This is a picture from our Getting Started guide about how to apply the vinyl sticker that comes in our kit. At first I thought green, that's a bit weird for a heartbeat sensor. I thought red would be better, and maybe it would hurt our Kickstarter campaign or future sales. But I think it hasn't hurt, and I hope it turned out to be more of a PulseSensor trademark green. It just so happens that in 2015, a few very successful PulseSensor sales years after our Kickstarter campaign, Apple came out with the first generation Apple Watch. And what do you know? They used a green LED for their PPG. This is the waveform from our first pulse sensor, the one we delivered to our Kickstarter backers. It shows a classic PPG pulse wave riding on a slowly drifting DC level. That's totally legit and really cool, but it's not easy to tease out the heartbeat from this signal in software, especially with the 10-bit ADC in the Arduino Uno, and especially with a sculptor trying to do digital signal processing. So in the first half of 2012, I learned about and developed a hardware high-pass filter to clean up and amplify the pulse sensor signal. This is the output from the filter I designed. The green line is the voltage midpoint plotted as a reference, and the pulse sensor signal is in red. The clean, bright pulse wave is super easy to run a simple algorithm over to find the heartbeats. We provide comprehensive Arduino software library with examples for many applications and hardware platforms. And since it's just an analog signal, you can use any signal processing scheme you like to derive heart rate data. World-famous electronics has not published any validation of our software output against any third-party PPG or ECG. We have said from the beginning that our pulse sensor is for entertainment purposes only. Internally to the company, we have tested simultaneously pulse sensor and our software alongside commercially available heart rate monitors and have found that our algorithm results fit well within the BPM ranges of the standard. In just over a year, Yuri and I went from concept to working prototype, acquired seed funding based on working hardware, then bootstrapped our sales to further develop the hardware and software to make a finished, successful product. Here you can see the pulse sensor kit parts. It comes with a 24-inch cable, Velcro dots and strap, vinyl stickers for protection of the skin contact surface, and a size-matched costume jewelry ear clip for ear-worn applications. We recently added a TPE printed stabilizer ring to help reduce movement noise when worn on the finger. We have a thorough Getting Started guide, a well-maintained Arduino library, and over 25 examples and tutorials. Our website is regularly updated. In 2023, we published a book with A-Press that collects best practices and project starter tutorials. Since 2012, in our busiest years, we have made and sold 6,000 pulse sensors, and in our slowest years, we've made 3,000 to 4,000. That makes for somewhere around 70,000 pulse sensors in the wild. Now, I have a personal rule goal that states, do not make future garbage. And that is one of the many reasons why I was attracted to open source hardware in the first place. Making pulse sensor open source ticks that box by saying, take this thing and see it as an opportunity. Use it as intended, mod it, or use it for something completely different, so long as it's useful and used. After having sold so many pulse sensors for so long, it's hard to know just who is doing what with them. But some stories stand out. The one I'm going to tell you now has been waiting to be told since 2013, and it fits well in this conference. Back in 2010 in New York, Maker Faire held their first World Maker Faire in the parking lot of the New York Hall of Science in Queens. And the fairs ran annually until 2019. Those first years were crazy good. And through 2016, I managed to man a booth there promoting PulseSensor or some other open source hardware project that I was a part of. At our PulseSensor booth in 2013, I met Murtada Al-Tamimi, an Iraqi who had been traveling between Vancouver, where he was in school, and his home in Baghdad over the previous year. The Iraq war officially ended in 2011, but they were still suffering from limited resources and infrastructure. In the summer of 2012, he and some friends were starting a Baghdad hackerspace to foster innovation and open source solutions to the problems Iraqis were facing at the time. They called it Fikra Space. Fikra means idea in Arabic. In 2013, the hackerspace was growing, but still suffering from limited tools and supplies to make things. He told me a story about his experience with PulseSensor, and I want to share it with you here. The following is from a doc Murtada wrote and some images that I could find from the Fikra space. The friend he mentions is Bilal Ghalib, one of the Fikra founders, who I believe is the one sitting in this photo. Here is Murtada's story in his own words, only edited for flow. The story of heart monitors in Iraq began when I stumbled upon a project that Bilal made on Instructables about his recent visit to Baghdad. He talked about his experience with the TEDx Baghdad team and the workshop he held to introduce them to the open source technology. And it was in one of those paragraphs that my eye caught the word Arduino. And so I got really excited and was hoping that he was talking about the same Arduino MCUs that I came to be familiar with during my last semester at school as I worked on a project that relied heavily on using an Uno. At first, I had no idea and thought to myself, what are the odds he's talking about the Arduino MCUs? The post had open source technology in its title, and for some reason, I always thought of open source stuff to be strictly software. And so it seemed to me that the Arduino as a piece of hardware don't really have a place in that blog post. But then I got really excited when I read further and understood he was talking about the very same Arduino technology I was using back in school. So as soon as I finished reading that lengthy blog post, I clicked on the little +BG that Bilal had left at the bottom of the page as a signature, and I was directed to his Facebook profile. I rushed to click on send message and started writing him what came to be a fairly lengthy message that was overly polite and apologetic. I felt the need to apologize in case he didn't like people he didn't know sending him messages on Facebook. He replied back saying, "Beautiful message, let's talk soon." This happened exactly 10 days before I was leaving Baghdad. I had been there for a quick visit at the beginning of the summer to see my family. It took a couple of days until Bilal and I actually managed to talk because of the time difference, which he didn't even realize since for some reason he was thinking I was still in Vancouver, even though I explicitly mentioned in my message that I was visiting Iraq and would really love to help put those Arduinos he left behind to good use. "Holy shoot," Bilal screamed with excitement when he realized I was in Baghdad, and we started discussing ways I could help. He explained that the devices, one of which being a pulse sensor that was donated by PulseSensor, were given to the TEDx Baghdad team and could be assembled together to build a heart rate monitor. We wrapped up our Skype call, and Bilal promised to connect me with the people who are holding on to the devices. And so he did. But it took a couple of days for the back and forth communication to actually lead to a meeting with the members of the TEDx Baghdad team who had the Arduinos and heart rate sensors. That meeting took place exactly 2 days before I was leaving Baghdad, so I wasn't sure how much I was going to be able to do with the prototype with the time I had left. But I went home that evening and tried to set up the Arduino with the peripherals, and much to my surprise, I was able to get a really simple and primitive prototype working by simply following online tutorials and instructions that came with the parts. As soon as I was able to get things working on my computer, I sent Bilal a message saying that I got something simple to work. He got really excited and asked for photos, so I took the picture above. He was at a conference and told me to quickly send him a photo as he was going to go up on stage and talk about this. It took a while for the photo to upload over the slow internet connection I had in Baghdad. By the time Bilal got it, it was too late to show in front of his audience. Here is an excerpt from the messages we exchanged over Facebook as this happened. As I read this and look back at it in retrospect, my favorite part of this conversation is Bilal's line, "It's the start of maker culture in Baghdad, man, not the end." This was taking place around 1 a.m. my local time, but I wanted to keep improving the prototype. I played around with the tools more and messaged Bilal about my progress. He responded, suggesting that I should connect with the Iraqi doctors who worked on the TEDx Baghdad team and ask them about the environment and requirements they had in mind for this device. So the next morning, I called Dr. Anas and told him that I managed to get something to work. He got really excited and told me that this would be very helpful. He said this to me using English words himself. "Believe it or not, our hospital doesn't have a functional heart rate monitor." I discussed with him the possibilities and features I could implement, mentioning that it's easy to build something that graphs the heart rate of the patient over time and sends the doctor an SMS or email if the heart rate of the patient dropped below a certain threshold. Dr. Anas explained that such a thing won't be practical for their environment because they were looking for a portable device that is battery operated and can work without internet or computer. He said even something that simply has an LED that flashes with the heartbeat would be useful. But I knew I could do better with the tools in the inventor's kit provided by SparkFun. There was an LCD, so at the very least, I could display the instantaneous heart rate of the patient. There was also a small buzzer, so I thought I could use that to sound an alarm when the heart rate drops below a certain threshold. But what should that threshold be? I wasn't a doctor. I had no idea. And I assumed it might even be different for every person and is something that is determined on a case-by-case basis. So I thought it would be helpful to have that threshold configurable by the doctor instead of hard-coding it in software. There was a handy potentiometer included in the kit, so I decided to use that for configuring a threshold. The kit also had an LED, so I decided to throw an LED on it that fades out with the heartbeat just for fun. There was a sample code for that provided with the online tutorials on PulseSensor. So that was the prototype I had in my mind, but I had less than 1 day to build it with minimal tools. I knew that I had to give up sleeping on my last night in Baghdad, but I still wasn't sure if that was going to be enough time. I started scrambling whatever tools we had around the house to start building the device. I managed to find a soldering iron, but no solder. So I asked my brother to buy me some from the closest hardware store. Then I realized that I needed some thin connecting wires, since this whole time I had been using those jumper wires that came with the inventor's kit and were easy to use on a breadboard, but wouldn't be suitable to use on a solder board. I looked around the house, but couldn't find anything useful, so I decided to go and look for some at the local hardware stores. I knew it wasn't going to be easy to find what I needed, and wasn't even sure how I would explain it in Arabic, so every time I got into a store, it took a lot of words to explain to the person working there what I was looking for. And one of them had a really funny response as I asked for a single thin electric wires. He responded asking, "How many amps are you looking to drive through it?" I replied, not more than 500 milliamps. He seemed confused and thought I didn't know what I was talking about and said, "What? How far is the generator you're connecting to?" And that's when I realized that he thought I was looking for those single cables that people were using a lot to connect to nearby AC generators that became popular in Iraq to compensate for lack of electricity on the national grid. So it's a usual practice for store owners to ask about the amount of power someone was looking to draw and the distance of the generator in order to be able to give the cable with the necessary power rating. After visiting at least 10 stores, I eventually managed to find some wires to use on the solder board. Electricity was a problem, of course, so I wasn't able to solder parts whenever I wanted. I ended up staying up until 6 a.m. that night to finish off most of the soldering I had to do. There were still some final touches I wanted to do, but I couldn't keep my eyes open at that point. As usual, my last day in the country was hectic, but this time it was even more packed because of some family matters. Not to mention all the goodbye visits I had to pay to my relatively big extended family. And as I went from house to house, I took the inventor's kit and Arduino with me and tried to make some final tweaks. As my mom drove, I tried to pull out the blue box of tools to cut out some wires, and I still remember her telling me to put the stuff away as we got close to an army checkpoint so as not to be suspected of building a bomb with all the wires and electronics I had sitting in my lap. So after a pretty packed day, I scheduled a last-minute meeting with the members of TEDx Baghdad I initially met with. We agreed to meet around 8 p.m. at Everyday Cafe in Al Mansour, the same place we first met, but I explained that this was going to be a quick meeting since I still had to go back and pack. Dr. Anas couldn't make the meeting, but I ended up meeting with another member who worked at a hospital too. I showed him the prototype, and he was pretty excited to see it working. We discussed different possibilities of improving it and expanding its functionality, and he asked if I could give him some pointers if he wanted to hack around with the software to introduce new cool features. Before finally handing it off to him, I thought of Bilal and how disappointed he would be if I didn't take photos of the prototype. So I pulled out my iPhone and took a few shots and a video with the device in action. This is the shot he took. Unfortunately, I don't have the video. PulseSensor has directly led me to the development of other open source medical adjacent devices, but those stories will have to wait for another talk. I'll just mention OpenBCI, which has began as a DARPA SBIR grant funded by the Obama Brain Initiative in 2013, and Timpan, an open source hearing aid development platform funded by NIH and the National Institute of Deafness and Communication Disorders. If you want to learn more about the history of Fikra Space, their Kickstarter campaign page and updates are rich in stories, photos, and links. As far as I can tell, they closed in 2020, but may have regrouped as some other entity since then. Here's a link to their crowdfunding page. Also a link to my website, biomurph.com. You can find me on most socials as @biomurph, although I am not super present on them. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share my and Murtada's story today. I hope y'all are having a great time, and I'm sure I'll see you again in person soon. Aloha.